How's it going, everybody? I am ZBilbs and welcome back to another metal albums ranked video. Today I've got another black metal band for you, and that is Dimmu Borgir. Now, if you've been staying up to date with my content, I've recently dove into some black metal bands. I ranked Agalok and Alcest, so some entry-level black metal, and Dimmu Borgir was another really good entry-level one. They mesh black metal with symphonic metal into symphonic black metal, so it's a little bit easier for my palate, who I don't quite get into the more raw, dark black metal stuff. So it was another pretty solid introductory one. That being said, because I'm not quite as much into black metal as most black metal fans, this list is going to be significantly different than most core Dimmu Borgir fans out there. In particular, the album that I think most people have as their favorite is going to be probably my last favorite, if you know what that one is. So if that upsets you, then, you know, is what it is. And same thing, the albums, there's two albums that most people are most people's least favorite because it's so overly symphonic and much less on the black metal, and those are my favorites. For me, the more of the emphasis on the symphonic was just better for my sort of introductory to black metal sort of palette. The heavier, darker black metal stuff just isn't quite my thing, so little words of warning before I go into it, that I am, obviously very new to black metal, so the more raw stuff just isn't quite my thing. But yeah, that's explained very well now, so let's just get into the actual rankings. So without further ado, let's start off at number 9, my least favorite Dimmu Borgir album, and as I said, a lot of people's favorite, and that is Enthroned Darkness Triumphant. Now really, this last one, it could have honestly been a three-way tie for last for me. There's 3 albums from Dimmu Borgir that I do not care for in the slightest, and then the rest, it's slightly, increasing levels of how much I like them. But this one, it's the first Dimmu Borgir album that they start to get into their signature style. The first 2 were just really low production and just seemed like really early, not well produced. Dimmu Borgir is still figuring their craft out. And with Enthroned Darkness Triumphant, I will say it is a well done album, whereas I can see why a lot of people love this album. The first 2 are incredibly low quality. This one has a lot better mixing. It has better production. It still has very black metal heavy production, but this one, honestly, it just feels like a straight up black metal album, which isn't really my thing. The vocals are, still incredibly raw, just like they were on the first 2 albums, which isn't my thing. The symphonic aspects is still way on the back burner. There's some like pianos and some other stuff here and there, but they're not an emphasis in the slightest. So there really just isn't anything that I'm interested in at all in this album. And it's probably worse than the other 2, whereas the other 2, there's like a song here and there where I'm like, you know what, that's all right. There's nothing in this album that I enjoy at all. So while I would say this objectively isn't a bad album, it is easily my least favorite because there's nothing in here that I enjoy. So Enthroned Darkness Triumphant, number 9. Moving on to number 8. These next 2 probably could be a tie, but I'm going to go with number 8. I'm going to go Stormblast. And I'm just ranking the original Stormblast. I'm not going to do the 2005 remake. I don't rank remakes. But once again, this is the second album from Dimmu Borgir, so they're still getting their footing. They haven't quite found their style. And once again, this is just basically a black metal album. And it has even more of a rough production than Enthroned Darkness Triumphant. They're still very new in their style. It's not very produced. Once again, there's little flakes. There's some, piano or keyboards here and there that give it some symphonic-esque style, but it really hasn't gained anything. Also, the first 3 albums have a very severe lack of vortex, which is one of my favorite parts of Dimmu Borgir, is he melds in, he has the little clean vocal stuff, which is a beautiful contrast of him and the main singer. I think it's like Silnaz or something like that. The black metal vocals with the clean vocals are so good, but that doesn't come until Spiritual Black Dimensions. So it's just another thing that just it really makes these albums rather basic, in my opinion. The one saving grace from this album, it has a somewhat interesting instrumental in Sorgen's Kamer or something like that. Even though I think they had some legal issues with plagiarism. I think they remade it in the 2005 version, but overall, just once again, just like Enthroned Darkness, not really interesting, but there's at least a slight saving grace. So that's Stormblast at number 8. Moving on to number 7, I've got their debut album, For All Tid. This one really, I pretty much interchangeable with Stormblast. Same things as I said with Stormblast. It's old, it's really raw, it's incredibly lo-fi. It feels basically just like a straight up black metal album with some keys and some symphonic stuff here and there. And every once in a while when they have a couple pieces or mostly instrumental pieces where I'm like, you know what, there's some interesting stuff. That's kind of interesting, which is why it's this high, but the rest of it just, doesn't do anything for me, so I'm not gonna stay on this one any longer than I have to. Let's start getting into the Dimmu Borgir albums that I actually enjoy. Starting with my number 6, and that is Death Cult Armageddon. Now for this one, I've seen kind of a range of opinions. I've seen this one being the absolute top, and I've seen this one being absolute mid, and I more so lean to this being a mid album overall. Now, what holds this album up is absolute just masterpieces, great songs like frickin' Progenies of the Great Apocalypse. I also really like Blood Hunger Doctrine. There's another decent one with one I can't really pronounce, Alig Helens Dod I Helvisrik or something like that, no clue how to pronounce that. But those first two, especially Progenies of the Great Apocalypse, is a fantastic, fantastic song. So there's some great songs in this album, but there are very few that I actually like. The rest of the songs, there's good things in a variety of other songs, but for me, this album, it kind of feels like been there, done that. It doesn't feel like anything too new or revolutionary. Also, it might be a bit personal, but I feel like there's only 2, maybe 3 songs that have Vortex on this album. So that's another personal bias, because I really do like, once again, the mix of the dark and the clean vocals. I think just works so well. So overall, while there's good stuff about this album, just a lack of consistency and a lack of Vortex make this a pretty mid album overall, in my opinion. So moving on to number 5, probably another controversial opinion, but I have got Spiritual Black Dimensions. Now this one, just like Death Cult Armageddon, I think it has similar strengths and similar downfalls. Now the strengths of this album is, for one, the originality. This one coming off the back of Enthroned Darkness Triumphant, which most people absolutely love. It adds in Vortex as a singer for the first time, which just works perfectly with the symphonic style that they're going with. They also up the symphonic aspects a little bit more. In this one, there's a heavy emphasis on the keyboards, the sweeping, like like works so well with that, just deep, dark black metal style of it. The contrast is absolutely excellent. And when they get a song that it meshes Vortex, it meshes the sweeping symphonic keyboards, it absolutely knocks it out of the park. Some of the best Dimmu Borgir songs overall are in this album. Reptile is great. The Promised Future Eons is another absolute great one. My favorite from the album is probably The Insight and the Catharsis. Dreamside Dominions is also good. Now, why this album isn't any higher is, besides those 4 that I've listed, once again, I think this album is pretty spotty in terms of, maybe not necessarily quality, just terms of how much I like it. While Vortex is in it, the ones that he's not in it, I don't find myself being too interested in. And overall, while it does have the sweeping keyboards, there is, I feel like, a lack of the more grandiose symphonic stuff that I really enjoy in some of those later albums. So once again, doesn't have quite as consistent of a quality as some of the later ones, but still a pretty solid album overall. So that's why I got Spiritual Black Dimensions at number 5. Moving on to number 4. This is when the albums start getting really good, in my opinion, and I've got In Sorte Diaboli, or however you pronounce that. I think this is their one and only, I think they might have one other, but a concept album. From what I gather or have read about the story, it's about a priest and his fall, being seduced by Satan and going into the dark, the bad side. Like, I don't know, something whack about that. But besides the story, it's got great songs once again. Coming off of the back, it feels relatively similar to Death Cult Armageddon in terms of style. I just think it capitalizes a little bit more on Vortex. He's in a little bit more of these songs here, and I think there just is a little bit more uniqueness when it comes to the lyrics and just the style of music, the verses. Just there's a little more stuff that actually sticks with me, and there's just a larger amount of interesting songs. Some of my favorites, The Serpentine Offering is one of my favorite Dimmu Borgir songs overall. It's fantastic. The Sacrilegious Scorn, Falling Arises, I believe that's an instrumental, and that's pretty good. The Sinister Awakening, The Invaluable Darkness, those are all really solid songs. Once again, not quite as consistent as some other albums. I think it's still about half and half for how much I enjoy versus how much I skip. But overall, this is just a really solid Dimmu Borgir album, so that is at number 4. Moving on to number 3, I've got Puritanical, Euphoric, Misanthropia. Man, they like crazy names. But besides this absolutely horrendous album cover, this is a pretty freaking good album. Now, for this album, well, I think a lot of Dimmu Borgir albums, what they have is they have a couple of really solid songs, but just lack the consistency across the board. And this album has the absolute opposite, where it doesn't have too many top-tier songs, but it has a really great consistency throughout the album. The only really great song I would say from this album would be Puritania and maybe Kings of the Carnival Creation. Those are both pretty solid. Other than that, there's just a lot of just good ones. Like Symposium is also a pretty solid one. Fear and Wonder is a nice opening instrumental. Blessings Upon the Throne of Tyranny, Hybrid Stigmata, The Maelstrom, Mephisto. So just really good consistent quality, really solid, decent style. I think this might be the album where they start adding after Spiritual Black Dimensions, they start adding even more symphonic elements to it. I think they start adding some brass along with those keys. So it starts fully utilizing the style that Dimmu Borgir that I like the most. So overall, just a really fun, really consistent album. So that is at number 3. Moving on to number 2. Number 2 and number 1 are really my favorites by a long shot. I know they're most people's least favorites. So let's just get it over with. At number 2, I have Abrahadabra. And this is most people's least favorite, which, I mean, I guess I see why, because these two albums, they're the black metal is put way on the back burner in favor of the symphonic aspects. For most of Dimmu Borgir's catalog, it's been black metal with a symphonic edge to it, whereas these last 2 albums are really symphonic metal with a black edge to it. And for most people who have, gone through Dimmu Borgir and throughout the years, they like that black metal with just a little symphonic to it. For me, as someone who's still incredibly new to black metal and doesn't appreciate the darker, more raw aspect of it, I like the heavy symphonic style with that just black edge to it. It's just my favorite style of Dimmu Borgir and symphonic black metal in general, so these 2 albums really did it for me. But yeah, Abrahadabra, I really like this album. This is another where I think it also could be a concept album. I think Abrahadabra is taken from Aleister Crowley, but I don't know entirely. But once again, as I said, I love the symphonic style of this. I think it really capitalizes on that in general. Obviously, this album and the next do suffer from the lack of Vortex. He would have been amazing in some of these songs, but it still does pretty darn good despite his loss. But let's go into some of my favorite songs. ZBilbs is a nice little instrumental opener. Born Treacherous is great. Gateways is another one of my favorite Dimmu Borgir songs of all time. Chess with the Abyss, the title track, or the band title track, Dimmu Borgir, Ritualist, Renewal, Endings and Continuations. So incredibly consistent, some top tier songs in this album. This is just a really, really great album, at least for me personally overall. So that's Abrahadabra at number 2. And lastly, at number 1, I have Eonian. This is their most recent album, I believe 2018. And I think this is just the pinnacle of when it comes to the symphonic meshing with that black metal style. So while not really most Dimmu Borgir fans' cup of tea, it absolutely is for me, especially being a new fan, and I guess just a new fan of metal or black metal in general. For me, there's not a single song that's worth skipping. Every single song is good in some sort of way, which just makes this just a really, really great album overall. It also has some of my favorite Dimmu Borgir songs overall. I think Interdimensional Summit is my favorite Dimmu Borgir song. I love the choir chorus that and then the bits of the black metal thrown into there. It's awesome. They do have and it's just so diverse in the style. No song sounds remotely like each other. There's some excellent heavy riffs in here, like Etheric is probably my second favorite. The riff at the beginning and the end is so darn catchy and fun. Council of Wolves and Snakes is also great. They've got some like interesting chanting here and there. So once again, some interesting styles. Rite of Passage is an excellent closer, just a incredibly uplifting, just fun instrumental. The Unveiling is an awesome way to start. Lightbringer has another excellent riff, so I could go on. Every single song is good and interesting for some sort of reason. So once again, Eonian is my favorite by a pretty solid margin. And yeah, so that is my list of my the 9 Dimmu Borgir albums ranked from worst to best. Let me know in the comments below. Did you agree with my list? You probably didn't, so let me know how you would rank your Dimmu Borgir albums. Let me know what other metal albums you'd like me to rank in the future, what other black metal bands you think that I would like that are more introductory. Stay tuned. Next week I should have Candlemass albums ranked coming out. So yeah, that is about all that I've got for you. So I will see you later.